Okay, I think we have started right now. I want to welcome everybody to this discussion of today on the systematic oppression of Bahá'ís in Iran. My name is Evin Incir, a member of the European Parliament from Sweden, from the Swedish Social Democratic Party. I have been working with issues related to Middle East for a couple of years. I'm doing my first mandate as the parliamentarian, but have been engaged in the issue for several years, not at least as in my role as Deputy International Secretary of the Swedish Social Democratic Party, which I was before, maybe 1.5 years ago. And today I'm sitting in the Committee of Foreign Affairs, among others, and the Development Committee here in the European Parliament, here in Brussels, where I am right now. Once again, welcome to everybody, and thank you very much to the Baha'i community for co-organizing this event, which is important for me, but it's also, I think, an important issue to continuing raising awareness on. I think it's very much a lack of awareness, unfortunately, within the parliament, but also outside the parliament. So I look very much forward to hearing the discussions that will take place today. One of the tools used by many regimes to oppress minority is depriving them of their properties and the possibility to own. During the decades, hundreds of Baha'is has been deprived their lives just because having another religion than the Iranian regime have. And more people, of course, are under oppression, are daily facing oppression and are daily being deprived their properties. With this said, I should also add that the systematic expropriation of Baha'is in Iran is a part of a strategy to impoverish Baha'is and try to banish Baha'is from the lands and even from the country. So in that sense, I mean, I have also seen this when it comes to other groups, other conflicts, but when it comes to Iran, it is very much clear the situation that the Baha'is are under right now and has been for decades right now. So with this said, I want to welcome our speakers of today. I'm very happy to welcome Miloon Kothari, Antonio Lopez, and Österberg. And for them to taking their time to attend this discussion. I'm not going to introduce them more thoroughly. That I'm going to let the other speakers to do. So with this said, Rachel, I want to hand over the floor or the mic to you. And once again, I want to welcome everybody for listening and taking your time to attending this conversation. And I look very much forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Evin. Really, our heartfelt appreciation go to all of the panelists, but also especially to you generally for being very engaged when it comes to various human rights issues in the world, and also for highlighting the plight of diverse groups and populations. And we see really again and again how powerful it is when the international community, and in this case, the European Parliament, raises its voice. And today you're helping to highlight the plight of the largest non-Muslim religious minority in Iran, which is the Baha'is, and through in particular this lens of property expropriations, as you said. And as you very much pointed out, property expropriation is really just another aspect of this continuous multidimensional and state-sponsored persecution, of which the clear aim is to destroy the entire Baha'i community as a viable entity in the country. But before we start with our very distinguished panel, we would like to show you a brief extract of a 2011 documentary called The Iranian Taboo, which was made by an Iranian-Dutch filmmaker, and which looks at various issues related to the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran, and among other things, gives a voice to those Baha'i landowners and farmers, specifically in the village of Ivel, which we will also talk more about in today's session.
یکده ایول اگه درست تلفظ کنم ایول نه بله
بله. تصاویر که ایول رو من از قبلا دیدم، همشون دیدم تبدیل کردن، تصاویر تکوننده هم هست. شما تونستی با این اهالی این روستا صحبت کنی؟
بله، من تمام مسیر رو رفتم و خب اون تقریبا توی ارتفاع نزدیک 1800 متری تقریبا دیگه توی مه و ابر و برف بود. ما رفتیم تا تابلوی ایول دم روستا رو از بر جاده
اصلی. یعنی این مسیر سفرتون هم فیلمبرداری کردی؟
دقیقاً. حالا انشاءالله خواهید دید.
بله.
زمین‌های بالا و پایینی قسمت‌ها بیشتر باغ‌های احبای ایول هست و در شبت که ولی خیلی جاده برق داره، ممکنه ماشین گیر بکنه.
اونجا دیگه نمیتونیم بریم.
مصاحبه ها رو توی خونه ها انجام دادیم، توی خونه همه این افرادی که به هر حال به نوعی اونجا مورد اذیت و آزار قرار گرفته بودن. حتی گاوهای اینها رو از هم سوا کرده بودن، تو طویله های اینا رو جدا کردن که گاوا نباید با هم باشن، گاو باهایی و غیر باهایی نباید هم باشن.
این صحبت ها میشه تو مصاحبه‌ای که شما گرفتید؟
بله به زبان مازندرانی. البته من
خب من خودم مازندرانی هستم، مازندرانی میفهمم، نگران نباشید.
در رابطه با مطلب ایول که از چه سالی شروع به این مشکلات و معضلاتی که به وجود بیام، از چه سالی بیه چجوری به توضیح هم رسیده نی؟
نشنم به چیزی گونه گذاشت
بلندتر بایدم در رابطه با ایول
خب بریم
در رابطه ایول چجوری بابیه شما رو در آکرد نه چیشی بابیه چه صحبتی بابیه چه جیباوت نه چیشی نوت نه اینا آکرد نه شما را یک ما بابرد اونجا ارشاد آکرد نه مسجد برد نه تکیه برد نه تیشم که چیشی صحبت کرد نه دار جوابی نه این بچه بچه تبیل بودیم
یه تو جلسه بابرد تکیه برسا و ما ارشاد آکرد گفت آره شما بینه یا مسلمان بابوین یا نیه بین از این محل در بودین اینجا همه آبا اجداد همه اینجا دوین همه اینجا در بودیم، همه زمین و کشت و در و همه اینجا هست، همه اینجا در بودیم. باید اینجا دیگه شم جانیه.
صبح که من هرستان همونجا بیرون برد من بعد من همه پشت باغ داره چوبدار همینده پشت سرم
چوبشون دسته دیگه
آره همونجا چوبشون دسته پشت کوزی بیار که نگه کمک اگر بازم ببیه اونا کمک کنه
پسرها دست انتظامی روست با انتظامات روست نه مردار خانه چی بیرون نکرد نه دخترها دست انتظامات روست نه ما زنان رو بیرون نکرد خواه اما رو بیرون نکرد نه اما کجا برین اسرائیل اما اسرائیل رو بلد نیمه اما کجا اما خواه من باید بار
یک سر
A warm welcome also to all of the participants who have joined us. We have almost 100 people listening into this. So thank you for attending. I think really the video speaks by itself. And I think before we give the floor to Mrs. Alai, I just wanted to say that you will have, as participants, the opportunity to ask questions in questions and answers. And they won't be seen by everybody, but they will be seen by the panelists. So the panelists can speak to those questions. Of course, we will be able to answer all of the questions, but we will definitely, in one way or another, stay in touch with you. So now, before further ado, just to give the word to Mrs. Alai. Mrs. Alai, you have been a representative of the Bahá'í International Community's United Nations office in Geneva since '92. And you've participated in numerous sessions of the UN General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and the UN treating monitoring bodies. And in many consultations also held by the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. And right now, you're currently serving also as the chair of the NGO subcommittee on freedom of religion and belief. And you will give us a brief overview of the nature of the persecution, and in particular zoom into the latest developments with regard to property confiscations more generally, as well as in the village of Ivel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, greetings to everyone. You know, at the end of the film, we saw this lady say, you know, they told me go back to Israel, but I don't know where Israel is. And I think that this is a proof of the persecution, the baseless persecution of the Baha'is in Iran, and the baseless accusations that are leveled against the Baha'is in Iran. Because one of them is being spy of Israel. We can see how these old men and women in a village up in Mazandaran mountains, how can they be spies? But other accusations as acting against the security of the state, and all sorts of other lies that are being spread and leveled against the Baha'is. The persecution of the Baha'is, of course, has been since the beginning of the Bahá'í Faith, which started in Iran. But of course, it took a very sharp turn at the inception of the Islamic Republic, because at that time, then the religious clerics who were always opposed to the Bahá'í Faith then came in power and are still in power. And that's how the persecution became systematic and government, organized by the government. And Heiner Bielefeld, the former Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, once he coined the persecution of the Baha'is in a term saying from cradle to grave. Because really we see that the Baha'is are persecuted at every stage of their life. Of course, we know that in Iran, there are human rights violations for all Iranians, and the Baha'is are not spared those violations. But on top of it, they have to face more violations because of their religious belief, and this is from cradle to grave. Again, I think we can see from the video that the gentleman says, you know, they put us in a mosque and they try to convert us and make us become Muslims. So clearly, these are also very clear proofs of the goal of the Islamic Republic in persecuting the Baha'is is to make them recant their faith. At the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, people were given the choice between their lives and recanting their faith. Today, we don't see that. But however, and this is thanks to the international community and thanks to individuals such as our colleagues here, both members of the Parliament, European Parliament, and also former Special Rapporteur and human rights defenders who really raised the situation. Cradle to grave, briefly, what does it mean? It means that in school you're persecuted, you're not allowed to go to university, you're not allowed to work in the private sector. Now we will go to this in the public sector, or even in the private sector. You're not allowed in the public sector, sorry. In the private sector, you know, your shops are closed, your lands are confiscated, your everything is forbidden. And then you're subject to imprisonment just because of your faith. And then even cemeteries are desecrated. So even once you're dead, you're still not protected from the wrath of the Islamic Republic. Quickly, to go back to Ivel. Ivel is a very interesting but also very sad story. The Bahá'í Faith, since its inception, almost 200 years ago, there were Baha'is in Ivel. And as you can see, there were many generations. You can see the ages of these ladies and gentlemen. They're all old, I want to say, in this film, because in fact the younger people left Iran, left Ivel because they were persecuted, and so they would go back. At the time, they would go back and do farm their lands and so on, but they would not live there. It was only the older people who would live there. And then there was, but the persecution, so the Baha'is were there, they worked for the benefit of the city, they had created hospitals and really progressed for the schools, health institutions, for the progress of the village. But then in 1983, it started when this gentleman said they were locked in the mosque and they were trying to be converted to Islam. And then again in 2010, some homes from 50 Baha'is were burned and demolished, and these are the images that you saw in this film. And then basically under a special court that is under it's the execution of the Imam Khomeini order, these Baha'is, on Article 49 of the Constitution, then the whole land, they were expelled and expropriated from their land. And the Baha'is have tried over and over again to go to court, because that's the way the Baha'is generally try to work, is to go first through the legal system and claim their rights in Iran. And so they went, but we are now seeing the last resort, whereas the appeal court has now ruled against them. And so the Baha'is in Ivel have no recourse to get their lands, and their lands are going to be confiscated by this organization, which is confiscated the properties under this Article 49, which means that not only the Baha'is are dispossessed, they cannot work, but it's also basically internal displacement, because they will have to leave their land, to leave Ivel and go somewhere else in Iran to try to make a living. So I think I'll stop here, and then we can have further discussions about the situation, as you said, dear Rachel, in the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane. We really have the great honor and pleasure to also have Mr. Miloon Kothari here with us. Mr. Kothari, you served from 2000 till 2008 as the Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing with the UN Commission on Human Rights and the Human Rights Council. You've presented 8 annual reports to the Human Rights Commission and the Council, really highlighting these global obstacles to the realization of the right to adequate housing and related rights. So including that, above that, you're also the founder of several human rights networks and organizations. You've published widely, lectured and taught at leading academic institutions around the world. We know you traveled to Iran during your mandate as a special rapporteur. And really, we just wanted to hear a bit from you, whether you could elaborate on what you've observed with regard to the systematic expropriation of Baha'i-owned properties during your trip and also beyond.
Okay, thanks very much, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the Bahá'í International Community and the Committee of the European Parliament for holding this very important event on a very neglected issue of religious and cultural repression in Iran. I just wanted to begin with a sort of a broader context that what we are talking about is part of a sort of historic discrimination against minorities in Iran since the so-called revolution. And land confiscation, land grabbing, house demolitions, displacement are common phenomenon that have been used by the regime as a form of what in a neighboring country is called collective punishment. And I think we should not shy away from saying that. So the type of confiscations we're talking about today, when I was in Iran, I also saw that with other minorities, with the Kurds, with the Arabs, with the Laks. And so it's a part of a general governance frame, which we need to very critically examine. So when we look at the nature of the property expropriation, When I was in Iran, I had testimonies, I took testimonies from Baha'i elders inside and outside Iran. And it was very clear that there was a disproportionate property confiscation, not only of homes, but also Baha'i cemeteries, businesses, and of course, displacement from the land. And there had never been any kind of participatory process or consultation with the Baha'i community before these decisions were taken. What was also very clear was that a substantive number of cases, including the one we are examining today in Ivel, the Article 49 of the Iranian Constitution is used, which says that that it's illicitly acquired property, not in conformity with the Sharia law. The article is very vague because if you examine it from an international legal perspective, it doesn't define what is considered irregular acquisition according to Sharia law. And I mentioned in my report that it's being applied in an ad hoc and abusive manner, which it continues to be, and that this abusive use of Article 49 is an instrument of confiscating property as a form of what I had written about as a form of retribution for the Baha'i holding certain political or religious beliefs. So in that report, I had actually recommended that the government of Iran should disclose information on the legal basis of how they were doing this, but also how many properties, how many people affected, what were the measures taken to investigate and reprimand abuses. And I'd also recommended that the whole notion of eminent domain, which many states use, needs to be, the whole doctrine needs to be examined and amendments to Article 49 needs to be considered as this article is being consistently abused. After my mission in 2005, the issue of confiscations has been addressed, particularly related to business, and also the issue of people demonstrating against land confiscations by the Special Rapporteur on Iran in his report in 2019 and 20, by the Secretary General in his report on in 2020. And there's a brief mention in the recent Universal Periodic Review of Iran of the discrimination against Baha'i. It doesn't really talk about confiscation. But the UN Committee on Civil and Political Rights, which monitors Iran's compliance with the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Human Rights Committee, in a concluding observation in 2011, actually explicitly mentions their concern about the confiscation and destruction of property and makes a recommendation to the party to take steps to ensure that members of the Baha'i community are protected against discrimination in every field. So it's quite clear that this form of land confiscation and other repressive measures are in direct contravention of Iran's obligations, freely accepted obligations to the Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, Civil, Political Rights, the Convention Against the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and a number of recommendations made by special rapporteurs and UN treaty bodies. And so I think that what is really important from the side of the international community is for us to ensure that this issue is much more prominent in not only the work of the treaty bodies and rapporteurs, but I would particularly stress the Universal Periodic Review, because our experience of the UPR has shown that even countries that have repressive laws, policies, administrative measures against particular groups within their countries are responding positively to the Universal Periodic Review, because it's a peer review, and I won't go into all the reasons. So I think it's very important for us to ensure that the recommendations coming out of the UPR explicitly talk about land and property confiscation of the Baha'i. So I would also recommend that European countries, the diplomats, also raise these issues in the Universal Periodic Review, and that we bring it, to a level where there can be a collective kind of a coordinated response. And I'm looking forward to hearing also from colleagues at the European Parliament on how the Parliament can respond. But I think that just to conclude, I think we have to keep in mind that it's part of a larger phenomenon that we are tackling. But at the same time, it's very important to focus on who is being displaced, what is happening to them, where are they going, and also to look at the whole issue of human rights defenders, to look at how women are particularly affected even amongst the Baha'i for the confiscation of land and property. And I look forward to engaging in the discussion and in the work after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kothari, for this excellent overview and for zooming into sort of the legal dimension of all of it, and then for giving very concrete sort of recommendations as to what also European countries can practically do and which steps they can take. And then at the end also for highlighting that it's part of a much larger phenomenon. Mr. Lopez-Isturiz White, we're very happy to have you here. Thank you for joining this panel. You're a member of the European Parliament and at the same time the Secretary General of the European People's Party. And if I understood correctly, you've held sort of both positions for the past 16 years. And prior to that, you were, among many other things, also the personal advisor of the President of the Spanish government for almost 4 years. As an MEP, you currently sit on the European Parliament's Committee on Foreign Affairs, among other things, but you're also a member of the Delegation for Relations with Israel and the delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union for the Mediterranean. And really, just as your colleague, Evin Incir, in your current capacity as MEP, we've seen how very outspoken you are on various human rights issues, and really how you call on for the rights of all different kinds of minorities to be upheld. What do you feel, also following Mr. Kothari's comments, are very concrete steps you believe the European Parliament or the European Union or even the member states more generally can take in terms of addressing this particular situation?
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Congratulations, you pronounce my name better even than many Spanish do. It's a very difficult task, the English name for the Spanish, so good, thank you very much. And I would like, first of all, to thank you for the invitation, this honor and privilege to address this problem. And also to my colleague, it shows also that there are no ideologies in this fight. We are here, Social Democrats, European People's Party, and other ideologies in the fight for the cause. Let me tell you that I consider, and I do represent DPP in this, and many of my colleagues, I'm sure, that religious freedom, both inside and outside of the European Union, is one of our utmost priorities. The pandemic and the subsequent political situation and economical crisis have brought forward the best and sometimes also the worst in us. We have seen persecution of religious communities increase throughout the world. The community of the Bahá'ís in Iran has unfortunately one of the most persecuted prominent targets of the most prominent oppressor, the regime in Iran. I am very familiar with what the Iranian regime does to its citizens, its neighbors, and to Europe. I have been sounding the alarm regarding the dangerous role in the region of many years from the regime. I always separate the country from the regime. There is a lot of excitement today about the possibility of diplomatic achievements with Iran, with the new Biden administration. But I must say, as a practical politician, I remain skeptical. Bullies respond only to pressure. And through the last years, we have seen that Iran, the regime, only responds to pressure. The EU must apply this pressure. Religious freedom should be a priority in our foreign policy agenda. And that's what colleagues like Evin and others that will speak after me, we are defending in the plenary in this parliament. So you said, what can the European Union and the European Parliament do? Help the community of the Bahá'ís and to help all persecuted religious minorities. We must use every tool that we have to push back publicly and boldly, from our platform as European parliamentarians to our vocal and active support to civil society fighting these regimes, to tough enforcement mechanism like targeted Magnitsky-style sanctions against human rights violators. For me, it's inconceivable that our European foreign policy actors do not dare to take approaches that are more political. Meeting with civil society in countries that restricts it should not be up for discussion. This includes the representatives from religious minorities like the Bahá'ís. I also want to express my strong belief, in light of our conversation today, that we need to reappoint a special envoy for the promotion of freedom on religious belief. To exercise your faith is an essential human right, one that is at the basis of our European way of life. The EU has to ensure this remains a priority. This can be done if such an envoy is equipped with capacity and budget. We know that the European Commission has committed to name a special envoy under the supervision of our Vice President, Mr. Shinas, and I'm sure he will do an excellent work, and we have to support. And I will take care and I will make sure that the Bahá'í are well understood and protected by this special envoy. I think this is what we all have to do in a very coordinated, because this is also very important, unity, also between the European institutions in the defense of the rights of the Bahá'í. This has been a very difficult year for all of us. And as I said, specifically for the religious communities that are persecuted throughout the world. We also saw interfaith dialogues and cooperations in certain parts of the world. I have been, as you said it, as president of the delegation of Israel, and also I am president of the friendship group of the United Arab Emirates. I have seen the Abraham Accords, and I've seen people opposing faith come politically, economically, and socially closer. I hope this will have a very good end, and I think it's so much needed for the region. And in Abu Dhabi, they have now created a new higher committee on human fraternity. I met the other day Judge Mohammed Abdel Salam, and we already had a point. We talked about the Bahá'í question, so it's taken. To tell you that this higher committee has the back of the Pope Francis and the Grand Imam Al-Assad in Abu Dhabi. So I think it's important because, you know, I'm seeking support wherever I can, humbly. I'm not an expert, you know that. I'm a Spanish politician, dedicated, but united with Evin and others in this fight. And I hope that these meetings will come back again and reminding us always that we have to be tough in this defense, especially for people that are suffering persecution nowadays because of the religious faith. This cannot happen. And trust that we have many colleagues in the European Parliament that I'm sure, like me, and that we are ready to do our work for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Even if you're not calling yourself an expert, there's a sense that you have a very, very profound understanding of really this right to freedom of religion and belief, and how important that right it is and how to uphold it. And also for highlighting the situation more broadly within the region and raising it whenever you can. We have, last but not least, we have Anders Österberg, who's here with us. And we've now had the international level speak. We've had representatives of the European level speak, and we're very happy to have you as a representative of the Swedish Parliament here with us. And so if I may say that, again, just like your colleagues, we've noted over the years how engaged you are with all sorts of human rights questions, and not just at the international level or at the national level, but we've also recently heard, and this is not to embarrass you, but that even during the pandemic, in your own local neighborhood. You started a whole network to help really get supplies to people who weren't in the possibility to do so. So thank you very much for being here, and just really to also tap into your thinking as to what it is a member state can do concretely, and how a member state can sort of at the national level, but even beyond the national level, raise these questions of human rights violations, and in particular this case.
Thank you so much for a nice introduction. It's also, I'm very honored to be here today and to have this dialogue and this conversation with you. I will make some comments about the work that we have done with the Baha'i community here in Sweden, but I think I will start with a quote who summarized the work that we are doing. To the poor, be a treasure of wealth, and to the sick, remedy and healing. Be a helper of every oppressed one, the protector of every destitute one. Be ye ever mindful to serve and any soul of mankind. Abdul Baha'i World Faith, page 216. I think that summarizes very well why we are doing what we are doing. It goes for the Baha'is, and it also goes for us parliamentarians. First of all, I want to say a lot of thanks to the Swedish Baha'i community for a very good and long-time cooperation with us in the Swedish Parliament. From our side, we really appreciate the work that we have together, and also that we also have some results in our work. But I also want to remind everyone here that is participating and are from different countries, or even from Sweden that I haven't met yet, that who are a politician. First of all, you have to remind that politicians are humans with good and bad sides, and that's also how you have to treat politicians. Politicians need to be enlightened and informed about the situation, because just because a person is a politician and talking on the national television, that doesn't mean that we know about everything. I can say that I was very unaware of the situation with Baha'is until the local community contacted me during a market in my society. And we just had a fika, and they told me, have you heard about the Baha'i? No, I hadn't. And they enlightened me and they informed me in a very, very well and very good way. So now we have this long-term cooperation with the Swedish Baha'i community. So it's very important for anyone to establish contact, because you cannot be aware of everything if you are enlightened. Like my Spanish comrade said, the situation about the Baha'i community is now a local question. And I also want to add that freedom of religion is also very close connected to the question about democracy. When you have freedom of religion and you are free in your every way to pray, to do whatever to show your religion or whatever, you can also see that it's a more developed democracies. Iran is very complicated. I just want to raise that. I think the easy way is just to denounce Iran and say, we are not going to talk to you, we're not going to deal with you, we are not going to do anything with you. The hard way with Iran is to have dialogue and talk and bring up when it comes to violations about the religious beliefs and other human rights issues. But also, of course, there is always a red line. If they cross a red line, of course, we should take hard measures. When it comes to the situation about Ivel, I think that we need to raise international pressure. I hope that my comrades in the European Union Parliament also will raise the question about the situation in Ivel. I support the special envoy for these questions. So what could a different kind of member states do in a concrete way? Of course, it's good to pressure the governments to have this dialogue and also bring up the situation that are current. Now, I think with the situation in Ivel, it's very the movie that we saw in the beginning was very touching. I must say, it touched my heart, and it's necessary to raise the international pressure. I think it's good if as many statements as possible from the national governments could be done, and also from the European Union Parliament. The 10th of February, the Swedish Foreign Minister will speak out what she thinks about the situation in Ivel. And that's also a very concrete step after the dialogue with the Swedish Baha'i community. Also, it's very good to raise the political awareness, to arrange seminars, meeting in different levels, to connect with local parliamentarians from your constituency, to raise awareness with them, because as a MP, you can, especially if you are in the power, you can actually influence the government to take some action. And we can also see that from the Swedish side, there has been some action. We had a meeting with the Baha'i community and the foreign minister later last year. And there has been some good influential points that has been taken, both in the United Nations, but also in the direct talks, for example, with Yemen and the Baha'is that were caught in Yemen and also had the death penalty hanging over them, but also in the dialogue with Iran. I stop there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Österberg, for really this beautiful and very practical contribution, and for really reminding us with those quotes you read in the beginning, what this people in Iran, these Baha'is in Iran, are ultimately trying to simply ask for, which is really the right to have the possibility to contribute to their society. So really, thank you for this. We have a few questions here, but before we get to one or the other, I just wanted to also just go back to Diane and ask you, why Ivel? What is the sort of the purpose in specifically targeting a village, a mountain village, if you like?
So I think that Ivel is just one place where the authorities were very able to raise the population against, and particularly I think the cleric of that city, against the rest of the population. And to a level which you have seen in the film is absurd, where they actually also separate the cows, as if, you know, the cows are going to, they're Baha'i cows and Muslim cows, you know? So I think that it is that level of absurdity. But in fact, it is the same thing is throughout Iran. It is not something that is particular to Ivel. It is something that is particular to Ivel because they were able to expropriate all the Baha'is in one village. And that the Baha'is have tried to put this through the courts and ultimately were not able to. But I think that this expropriation and the persecution of the Baha'is is throughout Iran. It is not only Ivel. And Ivel is just one village. And I think maybe what Ivel shows also is that they're not going to leave any stone unturned. You know, I mean, really, you know, a small village, you saw how difficult it was to get there. So if they concentrate on a small village like this, imagine how they basically concentrate on the whole population. And there are a number of documents that prove that. I think the 1991 document that was revealed by the then Special Representative Rinaldo Galli-Nupol on Iran, the UN Special Representative, that, you know, there is a whole guideline about how to behave with the Baha'is throughout Iran. So I think this is, unfortunately, it's not only Ivel. It is Ivel and the rest of Iran.
Rachel, if I can just make a point here. I think it's also very important to look at what happens to the village, the homes, the lands after people are evicted. And I think we have quite a lot of evidence from Iran that actually the houses are demolished, the crops are burned, everything is destroyed. So it's sort of almost like erasing the memory that there was a group of people here. And I think that is a very, very serious kind of a, you know, consequence of the displacement. So I think it's very important to really look at also the work we've done in the UN. You have to look at, you know, before, during, and after displacement to really understand the levels of deprivation and violations that occur when people lose their homes and lands. And as Diane was saying, the cases I looked at were also she's absolutely right, where of Baha'i having their land and homes confiscated, and in some cases even having to destroy, to demolish their own homes across Iran. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to stay with you, could you tell us a bit more about how the Iranian authorities also sort of responded to your report at the time?
Well, not very well. I mean, they were actually not very happy that the focus of the report was on the systematic oppression of minorities, because I also looked at what was happening with the Arabs and the Kurds. I had actually visited Khuzestan and Awaz in the south, and saw for myself the conditions in which people were living, and also around the area where land was being confiscated for so-called development purposes. And no, they were not very happy with the report at all. But I was just doing my job, and I think that it was important as a rapporteur as a human rights rapporteur, to actually disaggregate and look at what's happening to different parts of the population in Iran. So I was the last rapporteur who was there. There hasn't been a special rapporteur allowed inside Iran since then. And I'm also hoping that some pressure can be put from within the UN, also from perhaps the European Parliament, to at least tell Iran that you should allow, if not, essentially the special rapporteur on Iran, but if not, at least some of the thematic rapporteurs should be allowed to come into Iran. Thanks.
Thank you. And I just also, like, in terms of the other panelists, do you feel, do you get feedback from the Iranian authorities? Is there a possibility to engage with them on these issues, or do you have experience about this? And I think that'd be interesting to also hear about. Evin, you look like you have something on your mind.
Not at all. I think everybody was waiting for you to just address the person. That's why it became a bit silent. I mean, I am supposed to conclude in the end, but I mean, I can say a couple of words on that. With my own background, unfortunately, I'm not should I say, the person that they would invite firstly, unfortunately. And of course, with also us, both me and Antonio, raising the issue in the parliament quite a lot. I didn't say in the beginning, but I think it's important to emphasize that the issue of Iran and the situation when it comes to the violations of human rights, the oppression of minority, including religious minorities, has been on the table several times. And we have also been raising the issue of Bahá'ís in that context. But that, of course, leads to us not becoming those people that they would like to accommodate, firstly, to be a bit diplomatic. But yeah, more than that, I haven't heard about them. But since it is quite silent, that also shows very clearly that they're not interested in dialogue on the topics that we are raising.
Thank you. We also have questions here, and I would just invite the panelists to sort of maybe speak to them. One is from Anna Hill from Christian Solidarity. And so I just wanted to, she said there's a report produced by, Open Doors, Christian Solidarity Worldwide, and Middle East Concern. And in that report also sort of the arrest and persecution of sort of Christians is addressed. And they've seen a lot of monitoring and very high bail sums being issued, especially in 2020. And a question she has is, do Baha'is get monitored, and do they receive this very high bail sums too? And I think maybe probably, Diane, you're in the best position to answer this question.
Yes, thank you. Just to say yes, I think that we know that there is religious persecution is quite widespread in Iran, and it's not only the Baha'is, although I think the Baha'is probably, the European Parliament, I think Rachel said that they're or no, the EU actually said that they're the most persecuted. But yes, there is a document, there is a secret document that was also revealed again by another special rapporteur, the late Asma Jahangir, and that one was precisely instructing all forces, you know, the Secret Service, the police, the army, everything, the mayors, and others to monitor the Baha'is. So I think, and this document doesn't seem to be it seems to still be enforced. So clearly there is a monitoring, and the bails are high. The bails are high not only for religious minorities, they're also for all prisoners of opinion. Actually, we see in Iran that the bails are very, very high. So this is something that is all human rights, all people who suffer from human rights violations actually have very high bails in Iran.
Thank you. There's another question, and maybe one of the other panelists would just like to answer to that question. You all see it, right? Maybe Mr. Lopez-Isturiz White. Sorry, I'm just
Richard, maybe if you could read it, it could facilitate, I think.
Yes, thank you, because I cannot see it.
It said, it was repeatedly mentioned that international action has positive effects on the situation of the Baha'is in Iran. Given the strict sanctions against Iran that are more broadly in place, I am curious, through which mechanisms precisely does international pressure actually influence actions of the Iranian government in this concrete context?
Well, these sanctions, if I may, these sanctions have not been as they should be. That is my personal opinion, not shared. You know, I mean, there are several school of thoughts in the approach to Iran here in the European Union and the European institutions. I belong to those, and I said it in my intervention. You heard me well, that I think that, you know, there should be reinforcement of the sanctions. It's the only thing that I understand, unfortunately. I wish there was another, you know, another way out of this, you know, another kind of understanding or dialogue. I'm not refusing that, but it's impossible. This has been demonstrated historically. And in the question, you know, of the Baha'is, now in my case, I'm adding this also as another point for this question, and asking, you know, and I have done it through questions also publicly, that there is a reaction, you know, from the External Action Service here in the European Union. The Parliament, you know, we can make declarations. They are very, very useful to maintain the flame of the, you know, the interest of the media and other colleagues, politicians around in member countries. But, you know, also we have to be pragmatical. And the only way I feel right now is through those sanctions. They have not been effective enough. That's why maybe this thought that they have not seen, he has not seen in the question he was addressing, he was not seeing clearly the results. But I think this is because it was not enough. The European Union is not a military power. Is not we are not going to send troops like others. I think that is also, you know, our power resides also in our seriousness in spreading our values and our principles. I want to say a final word that I add the question that was put about the persecution of Christians, which the EPP, my party, has been very, very always advocating also in the plenary of the European Parliament, with more or less success with other political groups. But I call that, I think, as with the same strength I do with the Christian minorities, I do with Bahá'ís. I think that, you know, we have to be all together in this.
Rachel, if I can just add, I think that, well, I'm not a great fan of sanctions, I must say, very frankly, because I think sanctions can also do a lot of damage to the very people that you're trying to protect. And we've seen that with the US sanctions over the years in different countries. And I'm actually hoping that through the international mechanisms that we have, the UN Human Rights Committees, the Universal Periodic Review, as I was saying before, even difficult governments have responded. I have not myself done thorough overview of the last 3 cycles of the Universal Periodic Review that Iran has been through. But I'm sure there are some advances that have made, and I think we should really put much more effort into that, what I was saying before, to ensure that these kinds of issues, land confiscation, all do get into the UPR. And I know that over the years, UN agency access actually has increased in Iran. Again, I'm not an expert on that, so I don't know what the impact has been. Maybe Diane, you would know. But I hope that we can continue to try, because Iran is finally a member of the international community. I don't think they want to be completely excommunicated from that. So we have to just try more and make sure that these kinds of issues are on the table for discussion with Iran. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I will read one last question before giving the closing words to Evin. So this is a question saying, thank you to the panelists for their rich presentations. A number of panelists captured this as a matter of religious persecution, which clearly it is. But could there be greater action by the international community if the Ivel issue is understood as a raising of memory, displacement, and violation of economic, social, and cultural rights, as Professor Miloon Kothari suggested?
Perhaps I can quickly comment on this. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think it is very important that the persecution of the Baha'is is not only seen as persecution of religion, but persecution of all economic, social and cultural rights and civil and political rights, because the Baha'is suffer on every level. So it is a question of freedom of religion because it is because of their belief. But I think it does cover the whole spectrum of all the human rights violation, and it's important to look at this like that.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I agree. I was reading now. Finally, I was able to read. I agree with the question, and specifically it referred to a statement by the United Nations rapporteur, no, Mr. Kothari, and I think, yeah, maybe that could be, another approach, and I think it's a good idea. By the way, let me just also react to what Mr. Kothari said about the European sanctions. Let me recall that the European sanctions are not the same as the United States. I am a long-standing defender of the sanctions against the regimes in Venezuela and Cuba. Very different from the American case because it targets the population, and this unites the population against around the regime. As a fast learner for this kind of occasions, I am a great advocate of the sanctions like the Majinsky cases, in the European Union. We target members of the regime. That is the important thing, and that's what we are doing in Venezuela, in Cuba, and now also we're doing in Russia, and I hope that we'll do it soon. You know what's going on with Alexei Navalny, but also in Iran, and try to avoid any damage to the population. We learn also from the past.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 more minutes left. And without further ado, just really heartfelt thanks to all of the panelists, to all of the participants, and apologies for those questions we were not able to answer today. I hope there'll be further opportunities. And really very much thank you also to Evin Incir for having hosted this, for having gone out of your way to really put this together. And I give the final words to you.
Thank you very much again, Rachel, for this cooperation and for making this event happening. And thank you, of course, to our speakers, to Diana, to Miloon, to Anders, and to Antonio. And I'm sorry I'm saying the first name, but I think we have become so familiar with each other, so we can address each other with the first name. And I just wanted to conclude with saying again, what I said in the beginning, the importance of continuing addressing this issue. I think Anders said it very well, that he was not so much aware about the topic or about the situation of the Baha'is before he met the Baha'i community in Sweden by coincidence. And unfortunately, it's the case for many of us, and also in my own case, to be frank, I actually became aware through Anders about the situation. But nevertheless, I'm very much happy to be able to continue the struggle for human rights, democracy, for the Bahá'ís, but also for the minorities, the various minorities in Iran and the broader region in the Middle East. When I saw the movie you showed, I started almost to cry because it was for me very emotional, because it reminded me also of what my own family went through. My mother's mother, my grandmother, had her own village, or a smaller city, I should say, burned down totally to the ground by the Turkish military in the beginning of 1990s. So I know very well how this kind of situation affects you also on a personal level. But to conclude, I can promise you from my side, and I'm sure that I can also talk on behalf of my colleagues' side, that we will continue raising the issue, and we will take our share of responsibility within the European Parliament, but also, of course, as Social Democrats from the Social Democratic side. Thank you very much to everybody for attending and listening. And have a nice day.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.